What is up, guys, and welcome back to another man versus deer video. In today's video, we're talking all about ridge tops and how to hunt them. Let's jump into it.
What a roller coaster of a season it has been. She came in downwind and actually winded me.
Welcome back to the channel, guys. If you're new to the channel, make sure that you like the video, make sure that you comment, and make sure that you subscribe so you can stay up to date with the latest videos. This video is all about ridge lines and how to hunt them. Now, I did another video, which I'm going to link here, that covers how to identify both ridge tops and other terrain features that you're going to encounter when you're hunting deer on topographical maps. And that's a good place to start. If you haven't watched that video, I would highly recommend going back and doing so. Once you can identify these types of terrain features on a topographical map, then you probably want to know how to hunt them. And that's what this video is. And this video is actually going to be the start to a mini series I'm doing that covers all those different terrain features and how to hunt them. And we're going to start that series out by doing this video, which is how to hunt ridge lines. Full disclaimer here, a lot of the information you're going to hear inside of this video isn't my own. I didn't make it up. It's just accumulation of learning that I've gathered over the time that I've been hunting. And I'm going to basically condense it down into cliff notes to give you guys a starting point. So, when I think about ridge lines and how to hunt them, I think about three main topics, and that is bedding, food, and rut activity and/or travel. Now, these are all going to be relative to the terrain, the woods, these are all going to be relative to the situations that you guys are in and what you see when you scout. So take this information with a grain of salt. It really is just a starting point. Your situation could be slightly different based on what you see. Just basic stuff that we're going over. We're going to kick things off by talking about food. And when you're talking about food and ridge lines, it's all going to usually take place at the top. And we're talking about natural food. We're not talking about food plots or anything like that. We're talking about fruit-bearing trees, mass-bearing trees, or woody browse. Most of your feeding activity is going to take place up top. It is the most secure. It gives deer the best access to wind and sight for predators. They just feel the safest when they're at these elevations. So whereas there might be food at lower levels, all of your consolidated feeding is going to take place at the top. Now, hunting this is pretty straightforward. You're going to try to identify where the deer are feeding. You're going to try to identify where they're accessing, coming from and going to. And then you're going to try to set up downwind of the most heavily used trails in that area. So let's use this ridgeline as an example. Say that you found that deer are feeding in this area. After scouting, you realize that this is the most heavily used trail in that area. So after you plan your access and stuff, which is going to be relative to your situation and your surroundings, after you plan your access, you are able to discern that because the wind blows here and you're most likely to see deer on this trail, you're going to want to put your stand here. You'll notice that that stand is both downwind of food and downwind of that primary trail, so they're not going to be able to smell you, and you're still within about 20 yards or so of that main trail, so you're going to be able to shoot whatever it is that is coming and going. And that's the basics on how you're going to hunt a food setup on top of a ridge like that. Moving on to bedding. There's basically two schools of thought with bedding on ridges. And that is that's essentially does and bucks. Your does are going to bed in the thicker, brushier stuff at the very top of the ridge. And they're going to bed in family groups. When you're scouting it, you're going to see more than one bed. And they're going to, you'll find the beds on like a half to a full circle. Bucks, on the other hand, are very solitary creatures, and they're going to bed like slightly off the edge. And you're going to approach these two scenarios differently as far as hunting. And we're going to look at what that looks like on a topographical map here. Say you found a doe bedding area, you're basically going to hunt that the exact same way you would as if you found food. Keeping in mind that you probably need to stay a certain distance away from those beds to alert the deer that are in them, you're basically going to try to find a heavily used trail like you did with food and set up on the downwind side of both the bedding and the trail. Your buck beds are a slightly different story. Bucks like to bed just over the lip or just over the side of a ridge on the leeward side, the side that's protected from the wind. They do this because when they're bedded like that, the wind blows over the ridge and they can smell whatever's on top. They also have thermals rising because heat rises, and that's basically what thermals are, is the idea that heat rises. So you've got a wind blowing over the top, thermals that are rising up. That deer can essentially smell anything that's behind him and see or smell anything that's below him, and it's a very, very safe spot for that buck to be. So how do you hunt it? Well, let's look at a scenario on this topographical map. Say you identify a buck bed here, and you've got a wind that's blowing this way. And you know from scouting that there's a heavily used trail coming back up the ridge this way. You would want to place your stand here because it's going to be not straight downwind, but it's going to be on an off wind. And that's the scenario that you want yourself to be in when you're hunting a buck. It's going to be really, really hard to get straight downwind because he's got that base covered, right? So you're going to look for a crosswind or an off wind, or you're going to be to the side of where that wind is blowing, to where you're downwind of his trail, but not in a way that's going to alert him that you're up there. Those are a lot harder scenarios to hunt. You really got to put boots on the ground in order to find the best place to put that tree stand. But the idea is that if the wind is blowing this way and he's here and his trail is coming that way, you want to be over here. So the last subject we're going to talk about is rut activity, because that's the next thing that you're going to want to key in on as far as sign and like maybe wanting to hunt. And this, for most of us, that's going to happen in November, right? But bucks are basically going to take the same school of thought that they apply to bedding, and it's going to apply here as well. They're going to travel just over the side of these ridges where they can smell anything that's on top and see or smell anything that's on the bottom. You're going to have to do some scouting to try to identify where these trails are, because oftentimes they're going to be faint and you're only going to be able to identify them by a very faint trail, some scat, or a rub line. And a lot of times, and I'm going to show you guys this on a topographical map, if you look at the example we have here, you can see that one of these terrain lines is a lot thicker than the other terrain lines. That's usually a good place to start looking for these trails. Now, once you find one of these trails, you're going to want to set up in a way where your wind isn't blowing to that trail. That's going to be very hard to do. Why? Because depending on the type of day, or the time of day that you're in that area, the wind could be blowing over and the thermals could be coming up, and it's going to be really, really hard for you to set up in a way that the wind isn't blowing to that trail. So ideally what you want to do is you want to put in a stand in that area when it's got the wind that you think you're going to be hunting that area on. And again, you want to put yourself on the leeward side here. And you're just going to set a stand up and drop some cotton or drop some milkweed and see what that wind does. You might find that the wind that is blowing over the top of this ridge is stiff enough that it counteracts the thermals. You might find that on a calm day with no wind, you have to set up above that trail because the thermals are rising, and with the lack of wind, the thermals actually overpower what little wind there might be. That's probably going to be the hardest scenario to set up on, and you really got to have an idea of what the wind is going to do in that area before you do it. But if you do that, that area can produce for you year after year. So like I said, we're at the end of the video now, and this was just basic information. There are tons of channels out there that cover all of these scenarios in a lot more depth than I do here. Make sure you check them out if you're wanting more information. But hopefully, if you're new to this style of hunting, it gave you at least a starting point to go out and, one, be able to identify these features, and two, have just a general basic knowledge on how to attack them come deer season. I really hope that you guys enjoyed the content in this video, and thank you for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.